We're going to take a look at Judges chapter 13, which is the beginning of the life of Samson, which covers Judges 13 through 16. So much to learn from the life of Samson. And as I was studying Judges 13, I noticed that in the opening verses, there's something missing. Now, when I say that there's something missing, I don't mean that there's a mistake. In fact, I think that this omission, that thing that's missing, it's very intentional. It's very purposeful on the part of the author. And when we look at what it is that's missing there, we're going to see what that has to do with us and how that can help us in our spiritual growth. This is the first lesson that I'm doing in a series that's going to cover the entire life of Samson. So stick with me because I'm going to be putting out these lessons for the entire life of Samson. I've created a study guide for this lesson that you can pick up using the link in the description. And in fact, there's going to be a study guide for every lesson in this series over the life of Samson. Now, you only have to sign up once for the study guide, and you'll get that initial study guide. And every time there's a new video, there'll be a new study guide, and you'll automatically get the study guide for that lesson via email. So follow the link in the description, check out that study guide, and you'll get one for every lesson that I do. Now, there's some things that we need to understand before we get into Judges 13. Very important that we have some historical context and a bit of literary context. I'll explain what that means in just a second. The first thing I want us to know is some historical context. And for that, I want to show you very briefly, this is not going to be in great detail and not going to be very long, a basic timeline of the events of Old Testament history as they relate to the book of Judges so that we can have a better understanding of when the events of the book of Judges and therefore the life of Samson take place. So what I have here on the screen is a basic, very basic timeline. You can see it there. And by the way, I'm using Logos Bible software for this timeline. I use this software every single day for my personal Bible study. Highly recommend Logos Bible software. Now, here are the three eras that I want to talk about as far as this timeline is concerned. The first one, you can see it here up at the top, is known as a patriarchal period. There's some dates there that Logos suggests for that period. And that's the time that covers the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we can even throw Joseph in there. Now, after that patriarchal period, we move into what's called the Exodus period. And this is the time, the 400 years that the people of Israel were in slavery in Egypt. And it also covers the leadership of Moses and how he took them out of Egypt to lead them to the promised land and that 40 years of wandering in the desert. Now, in this timeline that Logos has, they also, as best I can tell, they're also including the time of Joshua, meaning taking possession of the promised land in this period of the Exodus period. And that's fine. And then you'll notice that you've got the period of the Judges, the period that we're considering now. That comes after, this is very important, that comes after the Exodus from Egypt, the wandering in the wilderness, and Joshua taking possession of the promised land. Then we get into the events that the book of Judges describes. And it's important to know that because as the way I explain it for myself is like this. In the book of Joshua, the people of Israel were taking possession of the promised land. And in the book of Judges, the people of Israel were learning how to live in the promised land according to the way God expected them to live. So that's the period that we're going to be looking at as we look at the book of Judges and specifically the life of Samson. Now, after the period of the Judges, you'll notice the period of the United Kingdom, also known as the period of the United Monarchy. This covers the reigns, the kingdoms, or the kingships, I suppose, of Saul, David, and Solomon. After that, we go into a completely different period known as the divided kingdom. But for now, just to give ourselves some historical context, that's as far as we want to go. So Exodus from Egypt, conquest of the promised land under Joshua, period of the Judges, therefore life of Samson, and then we get into the monarchy of Israel. So that's where these events are taking place. Now, what I want to do now is I want to go and read a very important verse in Judges, okay? Because this verse, it's going to explain a lot about what happens in the book of Judges. And it's Judges chapter 2, verse 10. You've probably read this verse before. And this verse is a comment of what's happening in the nation of Israel, or what's going to happen in the nation of Israel after the death of Joshua. Very important verse. Judges chapter 2, verse 10. It says like this. And all that generation, meaning the generation of Joshua, all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them, meaning after the period of Joshua, who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. That's an important verse for me. In fact, I think that is a crucial verse for understanding the book of Judges, because essentially, I'm going to put it in our contemporary Christian terms. Essentially, what I see happening here is this, that the generation of Joshua failed to disciple the upcoming generation, the next generation. Now, the word discipleship is not used in the book of Judges as we understand it, but that's essentially what took place. I can't blame the generation of the period of Judges for not knowing the Lord or what he had done for Israel. They didn't know. It was the responsibility of the generation of Joshua to teach them those things, and they didn't. That's the only thing I can surmise from here. Why didn't the generation of the period of Judges know about the Lord and all he had done for Israel? It's because the previous generation didn't teach them. And so everything that we see in the book of Judges, which is pretty chaotic and pretty far from serving the Lord faithfully, everything we see, I think, stems from this verse, that they had not been properly taught and discipled to know who the Lord is and to know everything that he had done for Israel. And then, so when we get to the book of Judges chapter 13, the story of Samson, I think all of that just comes to a culmination that you see at its very worst what happens when a generation doesn't disciple the following generation. And there's some pretty serious consequences. So let's go now to Judges 13. And notice how in Logos, it's very easy to jump from one verse to the next. And I'm going to read the opening verses, and then I'm going to point something out, a couple of things out to give us some context and some better understanding. So here's how it reads, Judges 13. This is the beginning of the life of Samson. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now, I want to stop there and just point something out, something parenthetical, where it says, again, the people of Israel did what was evil, or they did what was evil. Now, that sounds very general. They did what was evil. They did what was wrong. That can mean a whole bunch of things. But I want you to notice something from the original language. So I've got here in Logos Bible Software, I've got my English version. In fact, I've got 7 versions up here that I can jump between to compare the versions, a very important step in Bible study. But I also have my Hebrew text right here. One of the great things about Logos is that as I scroll, let's say I'm in my English text, and as I scroll my English text, my Hebrew text scrolls along, so they're always together. But looking at verse 1, here's what I want to point out. What it says literally is that, again, the sons, Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, they did hara, the evil. It's not just that they did evil, but it's that they did hara, this word right here, hara. They did the evil. And so I think what the author is telling us is that there's a very specific type of evil that the people of Israel did. It's not just that they were lying and cheating and stealing, they were doing evil, generally speaking, but that there was a very specific evil that they did. And I think the book of Judges tells us earlier exactly what the evil is. So let's jump back to Judges chapter 2. I'm going to jump back here, verse 11. Where it says, and the people of Israel did what was evil. Now, again, in that same verse, notice how Logos just kept everything in sync. Again, it says, and they did, Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel did, there's that word again, hara, the evil. Okay, so a specific evil. And then in this verse, it describes what the specific evil is. What is it? They served the Baals. They served, or Baal, as other people call them. They served the Baals, and they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. So the evil in the book of Judges is idolatry. Okay? Not saying that they didn't do a whole bunch of other evil things, but I think the fact that the book of Judges, the author says, hara, the evil, he's talking specifically about idolatry. So if we go back to Judges 13, life of Samson, again, the people of Israel did the evil in the sight of the Lord. They committed idolatry. And so as a result, the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now, this is important that we notice something here. I talked about some historical context. Now I want to talk about some literary context, some things that are literarily important in the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, we see a pattern of behavior that the people of Israel follow pretty consistently. If you read through all the different judges in the book of Judges, you're going to see this pattern. And this is where what I'm talking about, what's missing in the initial verses of chapter 13, this is where it becomes important. This is going to give us some insight. So what's the pattern that we see in the book of Judges? Well, there's about 5 steps in this pattern. I'll go through them very quickly here. The first step in the pattern is Israel sinned against the Lord. Hara, the evil. They committed idolatry. As a result of that sin, then this pattern happens very consistently in the book of Judges. Then the Lord gave Israel over to a foreign oppressor. And we see that in the story of Samson. Notice in verse 1, the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Okay, good. The next step in the pattern, what we notice is Israel cried out to the Lord. That's that third step in the pattern. Help us, deliver us, get us out of here. Step 4 is that the Lord raised up a deliverer or a savior, which we now call a judge. And then step 5, well, the people of Israel went right back to sinning. And you see that pattern repeated over and over and over in the book of Judges. Now, I want to focus on the third step in this pattern. Right here, Israel cried out to the Lord. And this is important because this is what's missing in the story of Samson. Let's go back to the text. In the story of Samson, notice, the people of Israel, verse 1, again did what was evil, hara, idolatry, in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And there we see the 2 first steps of the pattern. Next, what you expect to see, because you see this in every other story in the book of Judges prior to Samson, you expect to see the people of Israel cry out to the Lord. That never happens. Verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah of the tribe of the Danites whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children, and the angel of the Lord appeared. The story of Samson begins. And there's never a moment where that third step in the pattern, Israel cried out to the Lord. It never happens in the Samson story. That to me is pretty significant. Because in every other story of the judges in the book of Judges, it's there. So take a look, for example, these are the major judges in the book of Judges. Othniel, it says, but when they cried out to the Lord, meaning the people of Israel. Ehud, again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Deborah, they cried to the Lord for help. Gideon, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian. Jephthah, then the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Every single major judge prior to Samson has the people of Israel crying out to the Lord for deliverance, not the book of Samson. It's not, or the story of Samson. It's not there. Now, what's very interesting, okay, even though this third step is not there, the fourth step is. The Lord raised up a deliverer, a judge, back at the text, right? Back in the text. Because in verse 5, what you have is that you have the angel of the Lord coming to the wife of Manoah. We never know her name. And he tells her, you're going to conceive. You're barren. You've never had children. You're barren. You're sterile, but you're going to conceive. You're going to get pregnant. You're going to have a child. And then in verse 5, he says, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. We'll talk about that in another lesson. And look at this. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. What's happening there is that the Lord is raising up a judge to deliver the people of Israel from Philistine oppression, even though the people never cried out to the Lord. He raised up a judge anyway. Now, there are a couple of things that I ask myself when I notice that the people of Israel did not cry out for a judge. I ask myself, why? Why wouldn't the people of Israel cry out to the Lord like in the previous times, the previous stories of the book of Judges? And there, I can't know for sure, right? We can't know with absolute certainty, but I think we have some hints in the text. For example, back in verse 1, it says, the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. 40 years. Notice that. They were under oppression by the Philistines for 40 years. When you look at the other judges, the other 5 judges, major judges, Samson, the period of Samson is when the people of Israel were under oppression for the longest time, 40 years. The other judges, 7 years, 18 years, 20 years, but no one ever came close to 40 years of oppression. What does that mean? That means that there was an entire generation that knew nothing but Philistine oppression, meaning they were born, they were children, they were adolescents, they were adults, they got married, they had their own children, and just based on lifespan and just the way things were done back then, they were probably grandparents by their 30s or maybe their early 40s, but their entire life, a lot of them probably were born and died knowing nothing but Philistine oppression. 40 years. Now, couple that all they ever knew was Philistine oppression. Well, that was enough for them to not cry out to the Lord. They probably didn't even know that they could cry out to the Lord. No one taught them because they had been under oppression for so long. Now, this is me kind of extrapolating these ideas from the text. The text doesn't say this explicitly, but I think, man, 40 years of oppression, that's going to do something to you. That's going to crush any hope that you have. Couple that with the fact that this generation had not been discipled by the Joshua generation. They did not know the Lord, and they did not know what the Lord had done for Israel. And when you don't know the Lord, and you don't know what he's done, then you don't know what you can ask the Lord to do. This is why discipleship is incredibly important. It's important that you are discipled and that you do some discipling as well, so that we can tell the upcoming generation of believers, tell them who the Lord is and what he has done. That way, they will know the Lord, but they will also have the faith to cry out to him, knowing that he's done something in the past and he can do something for them now. So I think that these years of oppression and the fact that they had not been discipled, this is why the generation of Samson, or the people that Samson led, this is why they never cried out to the Lord. They didn't know that they could cry out to him. But I want you to notice something very important. Even though the people of Israel never cried out to the Lord gave them a deliverer nonetheless. A lot of people often talk about how the Old Testament is law and the New Testament is grace. But I'll tell you, friends, grace starts in the Old Testament. And this, what we see here in the book of Judges 13, the beginning of the life of Samson, I see this as a very clear expression of God's grace to the people of Israel. I think God was grieving. I think the Lord was genuinely grieving for the oppression that the people of Israel were suffering. Now, he put them in there because of their idolatry, certainly, but he never meant for them to stay there. This was meant to be a lesson for them. Yet they never cried out to him because they didn't know that they could. And so I think it was just at the point where he was like, these people just don't know that they can cry out to me. And so even though they never cried out to him, the Lord gave them a deliverer nonetheless. That's grace. In my view, as I read this story, this is one of the lessons I take away from these opening verses. That is grace. What's missing? They didn't cry out to the Lord. But what's not missing is that he responded to them anyway. And as I think about that for my own life, I wonder sometimes. I wonder, what are some things that I don't even know that I can cry out to the Lord for? Maybe it's been because I've lacked discipleship or being discipled in my life, or I haven't understood the scriptures sufficiently enough to know that there are some situations that I'm suffering through that, hey, Mario, you can cry out to the Lord. And maybe for whatever reason, I haven't, or you haven't. But I'm encouraged by these opening verses when I see how the Lord responded to the lack of cry on the part of the people of Israel, that he responded anyway. That encourages me because it tells me, Mario, there have been times that God has intervened miraculously in your life, even when you didn't cry out to him. Even when you had no idea that you could cry out to him, he intervened nonetheless. Why? He loves you, and he's a God of grace. He's a God who doesn't revel. He doesn't enjoy to see me suffering, even if my suffering is a result of my own consequences, even if my suffering is something that the Lord is putting me through because of my disobedience or consequences of my actions. He doesn't enjoy that. And when he sees that I'm just that ignorant or that obstinate, or I don't know, that I don't cry out to him, then the Lord responds in grace. And I think that's just such a wonderful lesson to take away from these opening verses in the book of Judges chapter 13, the beginning of the life of Samson, that God responds in grace even when his people don't know that they can cry out to him. So what might you cry out to the Lord for? Or let me ask you to do this. What if you were to reflect on your life, I don't know, the last year, past 3 years, 5 years, and think of ways in which the Lord, pardon me, has intervened in your life without you even asking. Maybe you never thought of that, but think back over these past couple of years and identify some ways in which the Lord intervened in your life and things worked out for the good, but you stop and you realize, you know what? I don't think I ever asked the Lord for help. And I want you to notice that moment, that intervention, as God's grace operating in your life, as God's grace intervening in your life, even when you didn't ask for it. That's such a wonderful thought. And be encouraged by the life of Samson and what we're going to read in Samson and what we see here in the opening verses, because there's a lot more to come. And therefore, I encourage you once again to pick up the study guide that corresponds to this lesson. The link is in the description. Sign up once for the study guide, and you're going to get every study guide for every lesson in this series. You'll get it automatically emailed to you as soon as it's available. And we're gonna grow together. And this is the point. This is why I'm doing this series on the life of Samson. There's a lot to learn and a lot from his life that is going to contribute to our spiritual growth. And as we grow personally, then we will have the impact, the ability to impact the growth of others. And that's what we should be looking for. We grow not just for our own sake, but we grow so that we can impact and be the reason that others grow as well. And when we do that, we advance God's kingdom. We advance the mission that Jesus started. So take a look at the book of Samson, or the book of Judges, the life of Samson. Pick up the study guide, read through chapter 13, because we're going to keep going through chapter 13. We barely started the first few verses. There's a lot more to come in this chapter. Pick up the study guide, and I know that we are going to grow together. That's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you. I'll see you in the next one.